Welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Let the room grow soft and dim around you, the way a great empty hall goes soft when the last lamp is turned low and the day's long traveling is finally done. There is nowhere you need to go now, no bell you have to answer, no road you have to walk. You can set it all down at the edge of the bed and let it rest there until morning. If you find this quiet hour helpful, you might leave a gentle like or tell me in a comment where in the world you are drifting off from tonight, and then let even that small thought settle and grow still. From here on, all you have to do is breathe and listen, and let me carry you slowly, in the dark, down through the tunnels of a fallen kingdom, and tell you the long, sad, gentle story of the last of a vanished kind. Tonight we are going to talk about an old traveler. He is a beetle, enormous and patient and kind, and he lives in the ruins of a kingdom that died a very long time ago. He carries passengers along the buried highways of that kingdom, from one silent station to another, and he has done this for longer than almost anyone can remember. He is the last of his kind. Every other one like him is gone, and still, every single time a station bell rings out across the dark, he answers it, and he comes, because carrying others is the one thing he has always known how to do, and he will not stop doing it simply because the world he did it for has ended. His name, insofar as he has one, is the Last Stag, and his story is one of the quietest and most beautiful in all of the ruined kingdom of Hallownest. There is a particular kind of character that stays with people long after the games and stories they come from have faded, and the Last Stag is one of them. He is not a hero, he never fights anyone, and indeed you are never even allowed to harm him, no matter what. He does not save the world or defeat any great evil. He is only a very old worker, doing a very old job in the ruins of a place that no longer needs the job done. And yet people who have traveled with him remember him with a tenderness they reserve for very few grand heroes, because there is something in his quiet faithfulness that touches a place most stories never reach. He is what devotion looks like when the thing you were devoted to is gone. He is what love looks like when it outlives its object and simply keeps on loving anyway. That is why his small story carries such weight, and it is why it is such a gentle thing to fall asleep inside. But to understand him, and why his small, faithful life is so moving, we have to understand the world he outlived. We have to go all the way back, before the ruin, before the fall, before even the kingdom itself, to a time when the deep places of the earth were dark and wild, and no one had yet given them names. Because the Last Stag is the last living thread connecting the empty present to a glorious and terrible past, and the whole weight of his sadness comes from the fact that he remembers it all, and there is almost no one left to remember it with him. So let us give him that. Let us remember it with him tonight, slowly, all of it, as we drift towards sleep. Long ago, before there were roads or stations or kingdoms of any kind, the world beneath the surface was ruled by instinct and hunger. The bugs who lived there were little more than animals, feral and wordless, crawling through the wet dark without memory or thought, born and dying in the same blind silence. They had no history because they had no minds to hold it. They had no names because they had no language to speak them. For a very long time, this was simply how things were, in the deep places under the ground, an endless dim churn of small lives with nothing to lift them out of the dark. And above all of that, in those ancient days, there was a light, not the light of the sun, for the sun rarely reached so far down, but a light that lived in dreams, a great and radiant being of warmth and brightness, whose name was the Radiance. She was one of the oldest powers of that world, a higher being, a thing closer to a god than to any ordinary creature, and she ruled through the minds of those who slept. There was a tribe of moths who worshipped her, who gathered in her light and dreamed her dreams and built their whole existence around her glow. For an age beyond counting, the Radiance held sway over the dreaming dark, unopposed, unmatched, the brightest thing in a world that had known only shadow. Beneath everything, deeper than the deepest root, older than the oldest stone, there was also a darkness. Not the ordinary darkness of a cave, but something far stranger and far older, a living emptiness that pooled at the very bottom of the world, in a place that would one day be called the Abyss. This was the Void, the oldest power of all, a sea of absolute nothing, formless and patient and impossibly deep. And the Void and the Radiance were ancient enemies, light and emptiness, the two poles of that buried world, though for a very long time neither one moved against the other. The light dreamed above, the dark waited below, and between them the small wordless bugs crawled and hungered and died, knowing nothing of either. Into this old and settled world, one day something new arrived. It came as a worm, an enormous serpentine creature of pale light, vast beyond the scale of anything that lived in those tunnels, and it possessed a power that none of the others had. It could see forward in time. It could glimpse what was coming before it came. This worm traveled down into the deep places, and when at last it reached the spot where it meant to stay, it did an astonishing thing. It shed its enormous body, cast off the great serpent form entirely, and stepped out of it transformed, smaller now, refined, a pale figure of quiet and terrible majesty. And this figure would become the ruler of everything that followed. He would become known as the Pale King. The Pale King brought with him a gift that changed the world forever, and the gift was mind. Where he walked, the wordless bugs woke up. They gained thought. They gained memory. They gained language and purpose, and the ability to know themselves and to know one another. Creatures that had lived in blind instinct since the beginning of time suddenly looked around and understood, for the first time, that they existed, that they had been, that they would be. It was as though a lamp had been lit inside every small dark head at once. And the bugs who received this gift did the only thing that made sense to them. They worshipped the one who had given it. They took the Pale King as their god, and even the old moth tribe, in time, turned away from their radiant goddess of dreams and gave their devotion to the pale new light who had woken the world. And so the Radiance was forgotten, slowly, quietly, the way a great old song is forgotten when no one sings it anymore. She faded out of the minds of the bugs who had once worshipped her. Her light dimmed in their dreams. Her name went unspoken. She did not die, for a being like her cannot easily die. But she was set aside, abandoned, left alone in the dreaming dark, while the whole world she had once ruled turned its face towards someone else. Hold on to that, gently, because it matters for everything that comes after. A forgotten god is a dangerous thing, and her forgetting was not an ending. It was only a long, quiet, gathering silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. Now let us talk about the kingdom that rose in the Radiance's absence, because it was magnificent, and the last stag remembers it in its glory, and part of what makes him so sorrowful is that he alone still holds those memories in a world that has crumbled to dust around them. The Pale King built a kingdom, and he called it Hallownest. and for a time it was the shining wonder of the underworld. It spread through the deep caverns like light through water, city upon city, tunnel upon tunnel, a great civilization of thinking bugs who built and dreamed and made and remembered. There was a city of tears, a beautiful place of tall, pale spires, where rain fell endlessly from the lake above, so that the whole city glittered and wept and glowed. There were gardens and archives and halls of learning. There were quiet green places where gentle creatures tended growing things, and grand stone places where scholars gathered knowledge, and deep, dark places where stranger things lived. And through all of it ran a sense of order and purpose, the gift of the Pale King made real in stone and light, a kingdom raised out of what had once been mindless dark. The Pale King ruled beside a queen, a being as pale and radiant as himself, known as the White Lady, a higher being of roots and growth who dwelt among the pale gardens. Together they were the twin lights of Hallownest, and under them the kingdom flourished. The bugs drew a kind of energy called soul from the living world around them, and with it they worked their arts and their magic and their long labours. Knowledge was prized above almost everything. To think, to know, to remember, these were the highest gifts, the very gifts the Pale King had brought, and Hallownest honoured them. It was, for a long and golden age, a place of genuine wonder, and a kingdom that large needed a way to move. A kingdom of many cities and many tunnels, spread across enormous distances of deep and winding dark, needed roads, and needed something to travel those roads. And so the Pale King built the Stagways, a great network of buried highways threading through the whole of Hallownest, connecting its distant corners, linking city to garden to outpost, to the quiet edges of the map. These were not small passages. They were vast, cavernous, tall enough and wide enough for enormous creatures to gallop through them at speed, carved deliberately through the living rock so that the kingdom could be crossed swiftly from end to end. And the creatures who ran those highways, who carried the passengers and the goods of Hallownest along the Stagways from station to station, were the stags, great strong beetles, powerful enough to bear riders on their broad backs, swift enough to cover the enormous distances of the kingdom, faithful enough to run the same routes again and again for the good of everyone who needed to travel. The stags were the living heart of the kingdom's movement. When Hallownest was young and full of life, the Stagways pulsed with them, a constant traffic of great beetles thundering through the tunnels, bells ringing out at every station to call them, passengers waiting on the platforms, goods being loaded and carried and delivered across the length and breadth of a thriving world. Our last stag was one of them in those days, young then and strong and surrounded by his own kind. He ran the highways when the highways were full. He answered bells when the bells rang constantly, all across the kingdom, every hour of every day. He carried countless passengers to countless places, and he knew every station and every route, every branching of the great buried roads, because in those days the whole living map of Hallownest was written into him through long and constant use. He was not the last of anything then. He was simply one stag among many, doing good and honest work in a kingdom that needed him, in the middle of a golden age that everyone assumed would last forever. Imagine it for a moment, as he must remember it. The great tunnels lit and busy, the bells of the stations ringing out across the kingdom, one after another, a constant soft music of arrivals and departures. Passengers waiting on the platforms with their small burdens and their small errands, scholars travelling to the archives, workers travelling to the gardens, families crossing the kingdom to visit one another, goods being carried from the places that made them to the places that needed them. And through it all, the stags, running the highways in their strength and their numbers, the great beetles who were the very sinew of the kingdom's movement, thundering through the dark with their riders on their backs, always another bell ahead of them, always another passenger to carry, always another road to run. It was good work, and there was so much of it, and there were so many of them to share it. That is the world the old stag carries inside him. That is what he means when he speaks of highways that pulsed with life. And the wonderful, aching thing is that he tells it without bitterness. When he speaks now, in the ruins, of those thronging days, there is no resentment in it that they ended, no railing against the loss. There is only a kind of warm, worn fondness, the way an old soul remembers a good time long past, grateful to have lived it. Those travellers are long gone, he says simply, yet I still remain. There is the whole of him in that one small sentence. No complaint, no despair, just the plain truth of it, spoken softly, and then he carries you onward. It did not last forever. Nothing does, and this is one of the gentle truths the last stag's whole existence quietly teaches. But before we come to the fall, I want to linger a moment longer in that golden age, because he does. When you ride with him now, through the silent ruins, and a station opens, he will sometimes speak of how it used to be. He remembers the highways full of life. He remembers the crossroads thronged with travellers. He remembers the bells and the movement and the noise and the purpose of it all. And there is such tenderness in the way he holds those memories, such quiet, unfaded love for a world that no longer exists, that you understand at once you are in the presence of someone who has outlived everything he loved and refused, somehow, to grow bitter about it. He does not remember the golden age with anger that it ended. He remembers it with gratitude that it happened. That is a rare and beautiful way to carry loss, and it is the truest thing about him. Now, though, we must speak of how it all came apart, because the fall of Hallownest is the shadow that lies over everything, and it is the reason the stagways fell silent, and it is the sorrow the last stag runs through every single day. It began with the forgotten light, the radiance set aside and abandoned when the bugs turned to worship the pale king, was not gone. She had only been waiting, dimming, growing quiet in the dreaming dark, for an age and an age while the kingdom flourished above her without a thought for the goddess it had left behind. And slowly, in that long forgetting, something in her turned. A god who is worshipped is warm and generous. A god who is forgotten becomes something else, something desperate, something that will do anything at all to be remembered again. And the radiance, at the very bottom of her long abandonment, reached out in the only way still left to her. She reached into dreams. What she sent into the dreams of Hallownest is remembered now by a single dreadful word: the infection. It began as a light in sleeping minds, a warmth, a golden glow that seemed almost gentle at first. But it did not stay gentle. It spread from dreamer to dreamer, and where it took hold it drove the mind away, filling the bug with a blank and burning orange light, hollowing out thought and memory and self, until nothing was left but a mindless, glowing, suffering thing. The infection turned the citizens of Hallownest, one by one, into empty husks, lit from within by a sickly orange fire, wandering the tunnels without knowing who they were or had ever been. It was the Radiance's revenge for her forgetting, and it was patient, and it was merciless, and it could not be stopped by any ordinary means, because it lived in dreams, and you cannot stab a dream, and you cannot barricade a door against a thing that comes to you only when you sleep. The Pale King, for all his wisdom and all his foresight, could not defeat it directly. How do you kill a being who exists only in the dreaming dark, a forgotten goddess who cannot be reached by any sword or any wall? He saw the whole of his shining kingdom beginning to sicken and glow and go mad around him, and he understood that the light of the radiance could not be destroyed, and so he turned to the only thing he could think of. If the light could not be killed, then perhaps it could be contained. Perhaps it could be sealed away inside something, locked in a vessel strong enough to hold it and empty enough to keep it forever in the dark. And here we come to the most terrible and most sorrowful decision in all of the kingdom's history, and I will tell it gently because it is a hard thing and the night is for softness. The Pale King, in his desperation, turned to that ancient darkness at the bottom of the world, the void in the abyss. He and the White Lady together made children out of that darkness, beings born of void and of pale royal light mingled, and these children were called vessels. They were meant to be empty. That was the whole terrible point of them. A vessel that could hold the infection had to be perfectly hollow, with no mind of its own to be driven mad, no will of its own to be broken, no voice of its own to cry out in suffering. The Pale King needed a child with nothing inside it, so that it could be filled with the thing that was destroying his world, and made to carry that burning light away into darkness forever. Countless of these vessels were born, down in the black abyss beneath the kingdom, and the tragedy of them runs deep, deeper than we need to follow all the way tonight. But know this much: they were not truly empty, not any of them, not really, and that was the flaw at the heart of the whole desperate plan. One was chosen, the one thought to be purest and most hollow, and it was raised up and named the Hollow Knight, and sealed away with the radiance locked inside it, bound in a temple behind great seals, watched over by 3 sleeping guardians called the Dreamers, who kept the whole arrangement locked in place. And for a time it seemed to hold. The infection was sealed. The burning light was contained inside the chosen vessel, deep in its temple, behind its seals, and the kingdom might have hoped to heal. But the chosen vessel was not perfectly empty after all. It had formed a bond, a flicker of feeling, a trace of a mind, and through that tiny crack, the radiance's light could still seep. Slowly, over long years, the infection began to leak out again from inside the very thing that was meant to contain it forever. The seals strained, the orange light crept back into the tunnels, and this time there was no Pale King to devise a new plan, because somewhere in all of this, the Pale King himself vanished, simply gone, his palace emptied, his light withdrawn from the world, leaving his kingdom leaderless and sickening in the dark. And so Hallownest fell, not all at once, not in a single dramatic night, but slowly, terribly, the way a great tree dies from the inside while still standing. The cities emptied, the gardens went to ruin, the infection spread and spread, and those who were not driven mad by it fled, or hid, or simply faded away. The lights of the City of Tears went dim, the archives fell silent. The whole shining civilization that the Pale King had raised out of the wordless dark sank back down towards silence and ruin, until Hallownest was no longer a kingdom at all but a vast and beautiful tomb, a haunted maze of empty halls where the orange light of the infection glowed in the dark, and a few scattered survivors clung on among the ruins of everything that had been. And the stagways fell silent with everything else. Think about what that meant for our old traveller. The highways that had pulsed with life went quiet. The stations that had rung their bells every hour fell dark, one after another, as there was no one left to ring them and nowhere left worth going. The passengers vanished, fled or dead or hollowed out by the burning light, and the stags themselves, his own kind, the great faithful beetles who had run those roads since the kingdom's founding, died away, one by one, until the tunnels that had thundered with them held only silence and dust. The whole reason for their existence, the living kingdom they had served, was gone, and so they went too. All of them, that is, except one. One stag remained, our stag, the last stag. He did not die when the others died, and he did not flee when the kingdom emptied, and he did not fall silent when the stagways fell silent. He simply kept on, older now, and stiffer and slower, with his great strength fading and his sharp memory beginning to blur at the edges. He stayed in the dark and the ruin, and he waited, in case anyone should ever need to travel again. For an age, no one did. The bells did not ring, the stations stayed dark, and still he waited, alone in the tunnels, the last of a kind that had once thundered through those roads in their hundreds, keeping a vigil that had no one left to witness it. There is a detail here that I find almost unbearably moving, and I want to give it to you softly. Over all those long silent years, alone in the ruined highways, the last stag began to forget. Not everything. He kept his memories of the golden age bright and whole, the highways full of life and the crossroads pulsing with travelers. But the practical things, the working knowledge of a working stag, began to slip away from him in the silence. He forgot where some of the stations were. He forgot the routes he had once known as well as his own body. And most sorrowfully of all, he forgot the way to the stag nest, the ancestral home of all the stags, the place where his kind had been born and had returned and had rested since the very beginning. He could not remember how to get home. In all that empty waiting, the road home had faded out of him, and he did not even know anymore where his own people lay. And still he waited. That is the thing, forgetting the way home, forgetting the stations, forgetting the routes, growing stiff and tired and old beyond reckoning. He still stayed at his post in the silent dark, ready, in case the bell should ever ring again. He had one purpose, to carry others, and even when there was no one left to carry, and no clear roads left to run, and no memory left of where the roads led, he held to that purpose. He did not abandon it. He could not. It was who he was. And then, one day, after an age of silence, a bell rang. Far off in the dark, at a station that had lain quiet since before living memory, a bell rang out across the empty tunnels, and the last stag, old and stiff and half forgetful, heard it, and something in him woke. He would say later that the sound of the bell would always call him back, no matter how tired he had grown, no matter how much he had forgotten. And so he came, down the silent highways, answering a call he had not heard in longer than he could count. The last stag in all of Hallownest rushed to a station bell for the first time in an age, because someone, at last, needed to travel. It is worth pausing here to feel the shape of the whole kingdom's sorrow, because the last stag runs his roads right through the middle of it, and understanding it makes his gentleness all the more remarkable. Everywhere around him, as he carries his passenger through the ruins, are the traces of the tragedy that ended the world. The sealed temple, where the chosen vessel still strains to hold the burning light. The deep, dark abyss, where countless empty children were born and left behind. The abandoned palace of the vanished king. The dreaming guardians locked in their long sleep. The whole kingdom is a monument to a desperate plan that failed, to a father who sacrificed his own children to save his world, and lost both. To a goddess of light, so hurt by being forgotten that she poisoned the dreams of everyone who had forgotten her. It is a story with almost no villains in it, only a great many people trying to prevent a catastrophe and causing it instead, each acting out of some mixture of love and fear and pride. And through all of that heavy sorrow runs one old beetle, asking nothing of it, carrying whoever needs carrying, remembering the good days, offering his broad, strong back and his quiet company to a small, silent traveler in the dark. He is not part of the great tragedy. He is something gentler that survived alongside it. Amid all the grand and terrible machinery of gods and vessels and infections and seals, he is simply a good old soul doing good old work, and there is a deep comfort in that, the way there is comfort in finding one small, ordinary kindness in the middle of an overwhelming story. The one who had rung the bell was a small, silent figure in a pale mask, a traveller who had come down into the ruins of Hallownest on a purpose of their own. We call this figure the Night. The Night does not speak, and the Night's own story is a deep and sorrowful one that reaches all the way down into the abyss and the vessels and the terrible plan of the Pale King, more than we need to follow all the way tonight. But for our purposes, what matters is this. The Knight found a stag station and rang the bell, and the last stag came, and from that moment on, the two of them were bound together in a small and wordless partnership that is one of the gentlest things in the whole ruined kingdom, because the last stag carried the Knight, freely, gladly, all across Hallownest, from any station to any other, asking nothing in return. Each time the Knight found and opened a new station, somewhere out in the ruins, the bell would ring, and the stag would come, and he would carry them onward. And each time, at each station, the old traveller would speak. He would tell the Knight about the place they had arrived, about the tunnels and districts around it, about who had once lived there and what had once happened there, sharing the memories of the golden age that he alone still carried. He became, without ever meaning to, the living memory of Hallownest, the last one who remembered the kingdom as it had been, passing those memories on to the one small traveller who would still listen. There is something quietly perfect about this partnership when you sit with it. The Night is silent and small, and carries a great and sorrowful purpose of their own, down into the darkest places of the kingdom, into the abyss and the sealed temple, and the heart of everything that went wrong. And the old stag knows nothing of that purpose, and asks nothing of it. He simply carries the small silent traveller wherever they need to go, freely, gladly, and tells them stories of the golden age along the way. Two lonely souls in a dead kingdom, one at the very end of a long life, and one perhaps at the very beginning of an impossible task, meeting at a bell in the dark and keeping each other company for a while. Neither of them speaks much, neither of them needs to. There is a whole friendship in the simple ringing of a bell and the simple answering of it, in the offering of a broad, strong back and the accepting of the ride. And he asks for nothing in return. That is worth saying plainly. In a kingdom where nearly everything must be paid for, where the very stations must be bought open with the small coins of the realm, the stag himself carries you for free, always, anywhere, as many times as you like. Once a station is opened, the ride is a gift. He does not charge for his strength or his memory or his company. He gives them the way he always gave them, because giving them is who he is, and the fall of the kingdom did not change that, and it never will. And as the night opened more and more stations, something began to stir in the old stag. The map of the kingdom, long faded, began to return to him. Route by route, station by station, the roads he had forgotten came back, waking in him as the bells rang again across the tunnels that had been silent for so long. It was as though the kingdom itself, for one last time, was remembering how to move, and the stag was remembering along with it. He urged the knight onward, gently, hopefully. "Open any more stations you may find," he would say. "It may help me remember. It may help me find the way." And what he was reaching toward, though he hardly dared to say it plainly, was home, the stag nest, the lost ancestral place he had forgotten how to reach. With every bell, every opened station, every route restored, he came a little closer to remembering the road that led there, and there was, threaded quietly under all his faithful carrying, a small and fragile hope. If he could only find the way to the nest again, then perhaps, he was not truly the last after all. Perhaps some others of his kind had gone there, long ago, and remained. Perhaps home still held something living. He did not let himself believe it too strongly, but it was there, that hope, quiet and stubborn, running under everything. Let us wander the stations with him now, one by one, slowly, the way the knight did, because each one is a doorway into a different corner of the ruined kingdom, and the old stag has a memory to share at every single one. This is the gentlest kind of traveling, the kind where there is no hurry, where each stop is just a place to pause and hear an old friend reminisce before drifting onward to the next. The first is in a little town on the very surface, at the top of the whole kingdom, a quiet place of a few small houses and a cold wind, the last inhabited town above the ruins. Its station had lain silent since before even the oldest resident's memory, dark and shut for so long that the townsfolk had forgotten it could ever open. And when it opened again, when the stag came to it once more, it was as though a door had been unlocked between the living surface and the buried past. From there, the old traveler can carry you down into everything below, down into the crossroads next, the central tangle of tunnels just beneath the town, where the roads of the kingdom once met and branched and crossed. This was a thronging place once, a hub where travelers from every direction passed one another, and the stag remembers it that way, full of movement and voices, though now the orange light of the infection glows in its corners and its halls stand mostly empty. Still, it is the heart of the old network, the place the most roads touch, and from here the whole ruined map opens outward. There is a station in a green and overgrown place, a lush, wild region where growing things have run riot in the long years since anyone tended them. The greenery there grows so wild, the stag remarks, that the station itself is nearly swallowed by it, vines and moss reclaiming the old stone. There is a beauty in that, the gentle, patient way the green world takes back what the kingdom abandoned, and the old stag notices it and does not seem to mind. Nature reclaiming the ruins is not to him a further ruin. It is simply the world going on. There is a quiet station named for the old queen, sitting between the wild green places and a canyon of drifting fog, a connecting point that was not much used even in the kingdom's day. There is a station deep in a region of towering fungal growth, strange and soft and dim. There are stations in the great city of tears itself, in its storerooms and near its lower reaches, where the endless rain falls and the pale spires glimmer, the grandest and most sorrowful district of all. Each one the old stag remembers. Each one he has a word for. At every stop he tells the knight about the place they have come to, who lived there, what happened there, what it was in the days when it was whole, so that the whole ruined kingdom is narrated to you, gently, station by station, in the voice of the one soul old enough to remember all of it. There is a station in a place of rest and remembrance, one of the most peaceful in all the kingdom, a quiet ground of monuments and drifting spirits, where the dead of Hallownest are honoured. There is a hidden station, tucked away in the deep grounds near the old palace, a secret stop that the stag himself did not even know existed, so that even he can still be surprised by his own kingdom after all this time. There is a station in a distant, half-drowned village at the far western edge of a dark and dangerous region, another one whose existence the old stag had never known. And there is a station deep in an ancient basin, near the very bottom of the world, close to the old seat of kings, at the edge of darker places still. And then, once every one of them has been found and opened and rung, once the whole network is awake again and the old stag's memory is whole once more, there is the last station of all, the hidden one, the one that is not really a station at all, but a home, the stag nest, high in a place of howling cliffs, the ancestral heart of his whole kind, the place he had forgotten how to reach and remembered only at the very end. That is the final stop on the whole long line, and it is the one his entire quiet story has been travelling toward all along. Let us stay a while now with the smaller things the last stag says and does, because they fill in the shape of him, and they are quiet and lovely to drift alongside. He makes no difference between his riders. Whoever rings the bell he comes for, and he carries them the same, no matter who they are, or what they are, or how he might privately feel about them. There is an old-fashioned dignity in that, the dignity of someone who has done honest service so long that fairness has become simply who he is. He does not judge his passengers. He does not choose among them. The bell rings, and he carries whoever rang it, gladly, to wherever they need to go. He has his small opinions too, which make him feel wonderfully real. He does not much care for the new tramways that were being built in the kingdom's last days, the mechanical trams that were meant, perhaps, to replace the old living stags with something colder and more efficient. He is loyal to the old ways, to the stag ways, to the honest work of a living creature carrying another living creature through the dark. There is something touching in that small stubbornness, an old worker's quiet loyalty to the craft he has given his life to, and a gentle sorrow at the thought of being made obsolete, of a world that might no longer need him. But of course the trams fell silent too, in the end, along with everything else. And it is the old stag, the living one, the faithful one, who remained when all the clever machinery had failed. He is humble about himself. He calls himself stiff and tired. He admits how much he has forgotten. He does not pretend to be the strong young stag he once was. And yet none of that humility ever stops him answering the bell. He knows exactly what he has lost: his strength, his memory, his kind, his knowledge of the roads, and he serves anyway, with what he has left, which is his faithfulness. And that turns out to be the thing that mattered most all along. Not strength, not memory, faithfulness, the simple refusal to abandon his purpose, even when the whole world that gave it meaning has crumbled away. And so, station by station, bell by bell, the night opened the stagways once more, and the old stag's memory returned, until at last the final station rang, and the whole map of the kingdom's roads lay open and remembered in him again. And in that moment, the way home came back to him. After an age of forgetting, the last stag remembered the road to the stag nest, the ancestral home of all his kind, and he could hardly contain himself. He rushed down the line to meet his small, silent friend, filled with a hope he had not let himself feel in longer than he could say. He had found the way home, and he was ready, at last, to go. Now I am going to tell you what waits at the stag nest, and I am going to tell it gently, because it is the heart of the whole story, and it holds both the deepest sorrow and the quietest hope, folded together, the way the truest things always are. They went together, the old stag and the small knight, down the long-forgotten road to the nest. And when they arrived, the stag rushed ahead into the great cavern of his ancestral home, into the place where his kind had been born and had rested since the beginning, hoping, after everything, to find that he was not alone. He was alone. The stag nest was a place of the dead. All across its floor lay the still forms of stags, the fallen bodies of his kin, piled and scattered in the silence, gone long ago. The great lift stood empty. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. There was no living stag anywhere in that vast and sacred place, not one, only the corpses of everyone he had ever belonged to, resting where they had fallen in the ruin of the world. He had come all this way, remembered all these roads, hoped this fragile hope, only to find at the end of it the final and total confirmation of the thing he had feared and called himself for so long. The last stag, he truly was. There was no one left. He had outlived every single one of them, and here they all were, and here he stood among them, the only one still breathing in the tomb of his entire kind. It is a devastating thing, and the game does not look away from it, and I will not either, though I hold it softly, to hope, quietly, for an age, that you might not be alone, to remember the whole long road home, for the sake of that hope, to arrive at last, and to find only the silent proof that the hope was empty, that everyone is gone, that you are exactly as alone as you always feared. That is a grief as old and as deep as any in that ruined kingdom, and the old stag stood in the middle of it, in the resting place of his people, and understood it fully. But that is not where the story ends, because in a quiet corner of that place of the dead, tucked away, half hidden, there was one more thing, an egg. A single stag egg, small and pale in the shadows, and it was cracked open, empty, hatched. Something had been born here. Not long ago, in the scale of these things, some young stag had come from that egg, had broken out of it, and left the nest and gone off into the wider world beyond the dying kingdom. The corpses on the floor were the end of the old generation, yes, but the cracked and empty egg was something else entirely. It was a beginning. It meant that the stags were not finished after all, that somewhere out there, beyond the ruins of Hallowest, beyond the reach of the infection and the fall, a new stag was alive, and had gone out into the world, and might yet carry the line onward into whatever came next. And this is the exact balance the whole story rests on, this cracked egg in the tomb of a kind, and it is worth holding in your mind gently as you begin to grow sleepy, because it is one of the wisest and kindest images in all of that ruined world. In the very place of deepest loss, in the resting hall of everyone he had ever loved, there was also, quietly, in the corner, a sign of new life. Both things were true at once. The old kind was gone, all of it, resting on that floor, and the kind was not finished, because one had hatched and gone out into the wider world, grief and hope folded together in the same small dark room. That is what the last stag found at the end of his long road home. And here is the most beautiful part, the part that tells you who he truly is. He does not respond to that cavern of the dead with despair. He grieves, surely, in whatever quiet way a stag grieves. But what the discovery gives him, in the end, is hope. The empty egg tells him that somewhere out there, beyond the borders of this dying kingdom, his kind lives on, freed from the ruin, gone out into the wider world to carry on. And that thought, that his line is not ended, that some young stag runs free somewhere under an open sky he himself will never see, is enough. It is enough to lift the weight of the word he has carried for so long. He may be the last stag in Hallownest, but he is perhaps not the last stag anywhere. And that difference, small as it seems, is everything to him. There is a small and lovely detail in how his story is told, one that makes the whole change in him visible. Before the journey to the nest, he is known simply as the last stag, that lonely word bound to him, the last, the only one. But after he has stood in the nest and seen the cracked and empty egg, after he has understood that his kind lives on beyond the ruin, the way he is named quietly changes. He is no longer called the last stag. He is called, from then on, the old stag. The word last falls away from him. He is not the last anymore, because the egg told him he might not be. And so he sets that heavy word down and becomes simply old, simply a survivor, simply an elder of a kind that continues. It is such a small thing, a single word changing, and it holds the entire turn of his story inside it. He walked into that hall as the last of everything. He walked out as merely the oldest, with his kind carrying on somewhere beyond the dark. The lonely word was lifted from him, and he let it go gladly. He came home to find his people gone, and he left that home carrying hope instead of despair, and I think that is the whole of what the old stag has to teach, if a gentle old beetle in a dying kingdom can be said to teach anything, that you can lose everything and still choose to carry hope, that the end of one generation can hold in its corner the quiet beginning of the next, that a life spent in faithful service to others is not wasted even when the world that service was meant for has crumbled away, because the faithfulness itself was the point, and the faithfulness endures. He outlived his entire kind and his entire world, and he did not become bitter, and he did not stop serving, and at the end of his long road he found a reason to hope. There are worse ways to understand a life. Let us widen out now, softly, and place the old stag back into the ruined kingdom around him, because he is not the only one who lingered on after the fall, and the company he keeps in the ruins makes his story gentler still. Hallownest, for all its ruin, was never entirely empty. This is important, and it is comforting. When the kingdom fell, it did not become a lifeless void. It became a quiet place where a scattered handful of survivors clung on, each in their own way, among the beautiful wreckage. There was an old bug who sat at the entrance to the ruins, in the little town on the surface where the wind blew, greeting the few travelers who passed and marveling, when the first stag station opened, that a building he had thought silent forever had come back to life. There was a map maker who wandered the tunnels with his quill, charting the ruins for the love of charting them, always somehow one step ahead in the dark. There was a historian who had shut herself away with the kingdom's records, keeping its knowledge alive. There were wanderers and hermits and merchants and dreamers, each one a small light still burning in the great dark, each one holding on to some small purpose of their own. There was a wandering scholar, a small quiet bug with a keen and gentle mind, who had come down into the ruins to understand them, and who could sometimes be found resting near the old stations, gazing out at the fog and the tunnels, and speaking softly of the stagways and the kingdom's history. There was a merchant or two who had set up shop in the little surface town, selling maps and trinkets and charms to the rare traveller passing through. There was a strange and boastful wanderer in a pale mask who kept turning up in odd corners of the ruins, always convinced of his own importance, always needing rescuing, a small comic thread of stubborn life running through the melancholy dark. There were hunters and hermits and singers and keepers of small shrines, each one a survivor in their own way, each one holding some quiet purpose against the silence. And so the last stag was not truly alone in the ruins, even if he was the last of his particular kind. He ran his highways through a kingdom that still held life, however scattered and quiet, and he carried a traveler who still wanted to see it, and he shared his memories with someone who still wanted to hear them. There is a real gentleness in that, the way even a fallen world keeps a little life in its corners, the way even the deepest ruin is not the same as death. The kingdom was a tomb, yes, but it was a tomb with a few candles still lit in it, a few faithful souls still going about their small work in the dark, and the old stag was one of them, and he was not without company, and he was not without purpose, and he was not, in the end, without hope. There is a strange peacefulness to the ruined kingdom, and it is worth resting in for a moment, because it is not the peacefulness of nothing, it is the peacefulness of a great and beautiful thing settling slowly into stillness. The rain still falls in the city of tears, endlessly, softly, washing the pale streets. The green places still grow, wilder now, reclaiming the old stone with moss and vine and quiet root. The spirits of the honored dead still drift in the resting grounds, gentle and glowing and calm. The whole kingdom, for all that it is fallen, is not a place of horror in its quiet corners, but a place of deep and melancholy beauty, a place where a traveler might genuinely pause and breathe and feel the strange comfort of a world at rest. It is sad, yes, but it is a soft sadness, a beautiful sadness, the sadness of an autumn evening or a favorite old song, and there is a kind of peace to be found in it that brighter, busier places never offer. The old stag runs his roads through the middle of that peace and shares it, quietly, with whoever rings the bell. There is one more small and tender detail I want to give you, because it is the kind of thing that makes this old traveler feel so real, and it is a lovely quiet thing to drift towards sleep on. In the earliest versions of the game that holds his story, before it was finished, the makers had drawn little pictures of the last stag sleeping, sprites of the old beetle at rest, curled up, dozing between the ringing of bells. These sleeping pictures were never quite used in the finished tale, but they existed, drawn with care, a small imagining of the old stag finally getting to close his eyes and rest. And one of those quiet resting images, in the end, was gently repurposed. It became one of the still forms in the stag nest, one of the resting shapes in the ancestral hall. A picture of a stag sleeping, turned into a picture of a stag at rest forever. There is something so soft about that, so fitting, that a drawing made to show him sleeping should become, in the end, a part of the place where all his kind lie sleeping still. Let us gather the whole story up now, gently, and hold it all together one last time before we let it soften into sleep, because it is a long road we have traveled tonight, from the very beginning of the world all the way down to a single cracked egg in a hall of the resting dead. We began in the old dark, before minds and names, when the deep places were wild and wordless, and a radiant goddess ruled the dreams above, while the ancient void waited below. We watched the pale king arrive, a great pale worm shedding his old form, bringing the gift of thought to a sleeping world. And we watched the bugs wake and remember and build. We watched the forgotten goddess dim into silence, We watched the golden kingdom of Hallownest rise, city upon shining city, and we watched the stagways carved through its living rock, and we watched the great stags thunder through them in their hundreds, our own old traveller among them, young and strong and one of many. We watched it all flourish, in a golden age everyone believed would last forever. And we watched it fall, the forgotten goddess reaching into dreams, the infection spreading its burning light, the pale king's desperate plan, the empty vessels born of void, the chosen one sealed away with the burning light inside it, the slow leak, the failing seals, the vanished king, the emptying cities, the dimming lights, the long terrible sinking of a whole civilization back down into silence and ruin, and the stagways falling quiet along with everything else, the bells going dark, the passengers gone, the great stags dying away one by one, until only a single old beetle remained in the silent tunnels, waiting, forgetting, faithful, alone. And then the bell, the night, the long slow reopening of the roads, the old stag's memory returning station by station, the map of the kingdom waking in him again, the fragile hope beginning to stir, the long-remembered road home, the journey to the nest, the cavern of the resting dead, and his kind all gone, and the confirmation of the lonely word he had carried so long, and, in the corner, the cracked and empty egg, the single quiet sign that his kind lived on beyond the ruin, and the hope he carried away from that place of the dead, choosing, at the very end of his long road, to hope. That is the whole of it, and it settles, in the end, into something soft and warm and worth carrying into sleep. A story about a faithful old creature who outlived his entire world and did not let it make him bitter, who kept answering the bell long after there was anyone left to ring it, who remembered the golden age with gratitude rather than grief, who came home to sorrow and left with hope. There is no anger in him at the end. There is no despair. There is only the long, faithful patience of someone who loved his work and his world and his kind, and who goes on, gently, carrying whoever needs carrying through the quiet dark. So let the kingdom go quiet now, the way it has been quiet for so long, and let it be a gentle quiet, a resting quiet, nothing frightening in it at all. Let the city of tears stand softly in its endless rain, the pale spires glimmering, the water falling and falling, washing the empty streets. No sorrow in it now, only the soft grey peace of rain, on stone, in a place where nothing more can go wrong. Let the gardens rest, the pale roots and the quiet green places, growing slowly in the dark, patient and unhurried, reclaiming the old stone an inch at a time, beauty returning gently to the ruins, with no one to disturb it. Let the highways rest, the great stagways, the buried roads, lying quiet in the deep dark, their work done, their bells silent, their long tunnels cool and still, and asking nothing of anyone tonight. Let the old stag rest. Picture him, if you like, curled somewhere warm at the end of a long day of carrying, his great strong body finally still, his old eyes closing, the bell quiet, the roads quiet, nothing to answer, and nowhere to run, and no more weight to bear. Let him sleep. He has earned it, more than almost anyone. He carried others faithfully for longer than a kingdom's whole life, and tonight there is nothing he has to carry, and he can lay it all down and rest. Let the ones he lost rest too, in their quiet hall, the great stags of the golden age, sleeping now where they fell, their running finished, their long roads run. There is no pain there any more. There is only the soft dark and the dripping water and the deep peace of rest at the end of a long, long journey. They are not suffering, they are only sleeping in the place their kind always came home to, together in the quiet. And let the small cracked egg rest in its corner, empty and hopeful, the sign that the story goes on, that somewhere beyond all this quiet ruin, a young one runs free under a wider sky. The line is not ended. The night is not the end of anything. There is always, somewhere, in the corner of even the saddest room, a small, quiet beginning waiting to be found. Whatever you were carrying today, you can set it down now, the way the old stag sets down his long burden at the end of the road. You do not have to carry it through the night. You do not have to answer any bell tonight. You do not have to run any road, or remember any way home, or be strong, or be anything at all except warm and still and held and ready to sleep. The carrying is done for today. You can rest. Let your breathing slow and lengthen, easy and unhurried, like an old traveler finally at rest in the quiet dark. There is nowhere you need to be. There is no one waiting for you to come. There is only this soft room and this warm stillness and the long, gentle quiet of a kingdom finally at peace, settling around you like a blanket. Rest now. The bells are silent, and the roads are still, and the rain falls softly on the empty city, and the old stag sleeps, and his kind sleep, and the small egg waits in its corner with its quiet promise that everything begins again. There is nothing left to carry, nothing left to run toward, nothing left to remember before morning. There is only the warm dark and the soft quiet and rest. Good night. Sleep gently. The long road is behind you now, and you are home, and you are safe, and you can finally, softly, close your eyes and rest.